When she divorced Scarlett, she publicly humiliated me. Miles is my lapdog. Once you leave me, you'll never find a wife this beautiful again in your life. Just wait, within 3 months you'll be crawling back to me for a reconciliation. But she didn't expect that 3 months later I would find a girlfriend who knew how to play the delicate, helpless act. My girlfriend secretly photographed me sleeping and posted it to her moments, visible only to Scarlett. Miles's looks are my pride. When I caught her, she twisted her fingers guiltily and said, "Miles, I love you so much I couldn't help showing off." Scarlett, furious, came to cause trouble for her. She thanked her with a grateful look and said, "You're an angel, how could you give such a good man to me?" "Thank you." Scarlett was so angry she slapped her. She immediately called the police, then phoned me all pitifully, "Miles, it didn't hurt, really, it didn't. I'm just worried about Scarlett, at her age she doesn't even know the law." Chapter 1. I never expected that after the divorce I would see Scarlett again, at the police station. When she saw me, Scarlett flew into a rage and shouted at me, "Miles, it's only been 6 months since the divorce and you already have a new love, are you even human? Explain yourself, or I will never forgive you." Scarlett was as beautiful as ever, and as always, she treated me like her worthless bootlicker. During the 3 years we were married, I gave her everything and loved her utterly. I handed over my salary, took care of all the household chores, and couldn't bear to see her suffer even a little. She, however, only saw me as a money-making tool and would threaten me with divorce at the drop of a hat. She worshipped celebrities, calling her idol husband every day, yet her contact name for me was simply roommate. She didn't work, loved buying luxury goods, and every month spent my entire paycheck. I tried to urge her to be more restrained, and she flew into a rage. "If you can't afford to support me when we're married, what would I be getting by marrying you?" When I ran into trouble at work and failed to get the promotion, she didn't comfort me, she looked down on me instead. "Loser. My best friend's husband makes millions a year, marrying you would be such a loss for me." I endured and endured, always hoping she would treat me as she had when we were dating, until I accidentally overheard her complaining to her best friend, "If it weren't for his dad having been the principal, I wouldn't have gotten close to him." Who knew his dad didn't have any pull after all? If I'd known, I would have picked some rich second-generation guy. I'm this beautiful, marrying him is already his luck. Does that mean I have to wash his clothes and cook and serve him too? I felt a chill all over, utterly crushed inside, so she married me for reasons other than love, simply weighing pros and cons. She never cared about me, so she didn't notice my growing coldness. Instead she grew worse, demanding that my parents hand over their monthly pension to her. What are 2 old people leaving so much money for? Every family's elders help the younger households. If you don't agree, get a divorce. Fine, then get a divorce. This time I didn't compromise. Scarlett looked at me with cold disbelief, unconvinced that I would really let her go. But she refused to be outdone and slid a divorce agreement in front of me that would leave me empty-handed. The house for her, the car for her, the loan I would pay off in one lump sum. I stared at this nearly rapacious divorce agreement and signed without hesitation. In Scarlett's eyes, this was nothing more than a negligible bit of rebellion from a bootlicker like me. In less than 3 months I would be wagging my tail and begging her to forgive me. She never realized that in these 3 years, every time I apologized to her, it wasn't because I was truly at fault. It was simply because I loved her. They say loving someone is like tending a flower, leaving with nothing is my final provision for her. Chapter 2. At the police station, faced with Scarlett's usual unreasonable tantrum, I glanced at her with an expressionless face. I ignored her and turned to walk toward my girlfriend Eloan. Eloan sat in the corner with an innocent look, watching me cautiously. "Miles, I'm sorry, I made your ex-wife angry." I could tell at a glance she was faking it. Men aren't actually stupid. Eloan wasn't as beautiful as Scarlett, but she was very good at playing the delicate, helpless role. Over the past 3 years, I had had enough of Scarlett's unreasonable tantrums. Especially when I was overwhelmed with work, she would blow up over the smallest things, threatening divorce at the drop of a hat, leaving me exhausted in body and mind. So, on the contrary, I found Eloan's fragility perfectly measured. It never made me feel used, and it saved me a lot of effort in placating a woman, letting me focus on my work. Most of the time, I wouldn't expose Eloan's manipulative remarks. I took her cold little hand and asked softly, "Are you feeling unwell anywhere?" "I'm dizzy, I don't know if they smashed my brains." Eloan looked at me pitifully, then turned to the officer and asked, "May I request a medical examination?" Scarlett, witnessing this, seemed provoked. She lunged crazily forward as if to strike Eloan, but I held her back. Her eyes went wide, trembling with anger. "Miles, you're protecting her." Eloan, not one to shy away from drama, looked at me with a face full of bliss and said, "Miles has treated me the best." "So your ex-wife is that fierce? It's been hard on you all these years." "I would never dare be so harsh to you." Scarlett was about to blow a fuse, teeth clenched, glaring at me, sneering, "Miles, so you like this kind of green tea girl? Your taste is truly vulgar." Eloan smiled faintly. "But Miles would rather walk away with nothing than be with someone elegant and beautiful like you." A police officer interrupted the two women's quarrel and, as a formality, asked, "All right, are you two trying to reconcile, or what?" Scarlett shouted loudly, "Officer, this woman is the other woman, she ruined my family, it's only right that I hit her." I frowned and couldn't help but say, "Don't speak nonsense, I only started seeing Eloan after the divorce." The officer also said, "No matter who she is, hitting someone is wrong." But how could Scarlett think hitting was wrong? When she was angry she often scratched me until my whole body was covered in marks. With such a disparity in strength between men and women, I was afraid of hurting her, so I never fought back. She was used to being arrogant, thinking that when Eloan saw how pretty she was, she would feel ashamed and meekly leave me. Unexpectedly, Eloan wasn't one to be bullied. She sent her straight to the police station. The officer looked at Eloan and asked sternly, "You're the victim. What are your demands?" Eloan said with a face full of grievance, "I don't know if I have internal injuries. I demand a full body check. Scarlett should be the one to pay for it." The officer nodded. Scarlett snorted coldly, "Ridiculous. Gone mad from poverty. I'll slap you again and that'll cover the cost of 10 examinations." Eloan continued. "Also, I demand that Scarlett apologize to me." Scarlett said contemptuously, "You don't deserve it." The police officer looked at Scarlett and said, "Assaulting another person is punishable by detention of more than 5 days but less than 10 days, and a fine of more than 200 yuan but less than 500 yuan. If you can obtain the victim's forgiveness, detention may be avoided." Scarlett's eyes flashed in surprise. After thinking it over and very reluctantly, she said to Eloan, "I'm sorry." Eloan said with a grin, "Sorry, I won't accept that." Scarlett glared at Eloan angrily and said, "Bitch, are you messing with me?" Eloan said, "First, I'm not sure if I'm injured. Second, even if I'm physically fine, you hit me and then accused me of being the other woman, causing irreparable psychological harm. I'm going to the hospital for a checkup, you can stay at the station." After saying this and getting the police's consent, Eloan was about to leave the station. I followed behind Eloan. Scarlett glared at me resentfully and shouted, "Miles, can't you see she did it on purpose to hurt me?" Eloan couldn't help but speak seriously. "Scarlett, if you hadn't hit me, how would you have ended up detained? You don't expect everyone to be like Miles, letting you hit and abuse them, do you? Shut up. Miles, say something. Can you stand by and watch me get detained?" A flash of tears crossed Scarlett's eyes, as if she couldn't believe I would take Eloan's side. After all, ever since we started dating, I've spoiled her without restraint. No matter how unreasonable she became, even if she lashed out at me in a tantrum, I'd always put up with it, coaxing her gently. I was silent for a long moment, then said, "Scarlett, we're already divorced." Scarlett froze. She was the sort to fling the word divorce around as casually as she ate. In that instant, though, she seemed to realize the true meaning of it for the first time. I couldn't help but find it ridiculous. Her look of shock made it seem as if I mattered to her that much. She prided herself on being young and beautiful. Marrying me had been a loss for her, and now that she had cut her losses in time, what was there left to complain about? Chapter 3. After we left the station, Eloan studied my expression and asked softly, "Miles, I turned your ex-wife over to the police. Would you be angry? If you feel sorry for her, I can choose not to press charges. I looked at her anxious face. This time she wasn't pretending, she truly believed I would pity Scarlett. Eloan was a classmate of mine from high school. My image as a henpecked husband had long since taken root. Some classmates even whispered that Scarlett had put a spell on me. Once at a reunion, because Scarlett had drained my bank account, when the bill came I couldn't even scrape together my share of 300 yuan. Back then I got teased a lot by my classmates. They all said that living like me was a failure, earning $500,000 a year yet not even able to afford a meal. It was Eloan who bailed me out and paid the bill. I chuckled and ruffled Eloan's hair, asking, "So you got beaten for nothing?" Her long lashes fluttered slightly and her tone fell. "I don't mind taking a bit of wrong, but I don't want you to be put in a spot. It just makes me so angry. Why doesn't she appreciate you at all?" I stiffened for a moment. I had asked myself that countless times before too. Why didn't Scarlett appreciate me at all? I don't think I have the right to influence Eloan's decision. Besides, if it weren't for me, she wouldn't have taken that slap. I looked at her calmly and said, "Do what you want to do. Don't worry about me." Even if Eloan truly had Scarlett detained for 10 days, it would be lawful and reasonable. Scarlett has never worked. With the way she conducts herself now, even without Eloan there would be others to teach her how to behave. I rode a motorcycle, taking Eloan to her checkup. She obediently put on her helmet, wrapped her arms around my waist, and rested her head against my back. The fresh scent of her hair lingered at my nose, and I couldn't help but lift the corners of my mouth. When we divorced, I left the car to Scarlett. For work convenience I bought a second-hand motorcycle. At the time, many classmates, eager to celebrate my escape, kept setting me up on blind dates. I had no interest in finding someone. Only when I couldn't politely refuse would I meet a woman for dinner, on my motorcycle. Fortunately, most women frowned when they saw the bike. The braver ones even turned and walked away on the spot. Even if they reluctantly had dinner, there was never anything after that. I didn't actually want to start looking for a partner so soon. The blind dates were just to appease everyone's enthusiasm, so I didn't pay them much mind. Eloan, however, when she invited me to visit our sick high school homeroom teacher and saw my battered helmet, showed up the next day with a brand new one. She beamed and said, "You're so smart, take care of that brain." I had done well in high school and often tutored her. I just hadn't expected she'd remember it this long. Later a classmate let me know that Eloan had actually been secretly in love with me since high school. She'd never had a boyfriend and publicly claimed to be a singleton by choice. But she was unfailingly attentive to me alone. After my divorce, she often asked me out to climb mountains and clear my head. Once, during a hike, a sudden downpour soaked us. I handed her my jacket to shield her from the rain, and she abruptly stopped. Mist hung in the mountain air, droplets clung to her eyelashes, and her wet eyes looked straight at me. "Miles, do you want to be with me?" I felt my breath catch and replied softly, "Don't joke. A twice-married man like me, how could I ever hold you back?" Just like Scarlett said, I walked away from my marriage with nothing. No woman would be interested in me. I'm an older man on his second marriage, a failed promotion and a pathetic loser, a mama's boy who won't touch his parents' pension. But I don't think so. Eloan, who was usually soft and delicate, suddenly raised her voice until it was deafening. "In my heart, you are the best man in the world. You left home with nothing, which shows you value loyalty and sentiment. You surely won't betray me in the future. You failed to get promoted, yet you still work diligently. That shows you have a sense of responsibility and ambition. I believe you'll make something of yourself. You won't touch your parents' pension, which shows your filial piety. If a man can't even be filial to his parents, what kind of man is he? I like you very much. If you won't agree to me, could it be that you still can't forget your ex-wife?" Her eyes blinked, and suddenly tears fell. I was silent for a moment, then couldn't help but pull her into my arms. Chapter 4. After accompanying Eloan to her medical checkup, on the way back to the rented room I suddenly received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, it turned out Scarlett had borrowed a landline at the police station to call me. Miles, you've been tricked by Eloan. I felt a twinge between my brows. Eloan said considerately, you take the call first, I'll go to the supermarket to buy ingredients and we'll have dinner at home tonight. I nodded, watching Eloan's retreating figure as I parked the motorcycle by the roadside. Scarlett, if I were you, I'd try to win Eloan's forgiveness as soon as possible, not waste time on me. Scarlett first demanded, then raised her voice, do you really have the heart to watch Eloan bully me like this? You have no conscience, always chasing after the new, helping another woman hurt me. I sighed, but the oppressive weight in my chest still surged, refusing to dissipate. We're divorced. If we're talking closeness now, you're the other woman, Eloan is my girlfriend. Also, why are you the one still at the police station and not her? Assault is a crime, can't you see the problem lies with you? Scarlett retorted stubbornly, I'm not legally illiterate. She posted photos of you sleeping, invading your privacy, why don't you sue her? I felt like laughing in anger. I forced myself to take several deep breaths before answering her with difficulty, because she posted me, not the various luxury goods bought with my money. I'm actually pleased. Scarlett's social feed was nothing but exquisite afternoon teas and handbags and jewelry, cultivating an image of a wealthy lady. She never flaunted me, she would show off the things I bought her while complaining that I earned less than her best friend's husband, saying I embarrassed her. Scarlett was momentarily stunned, unusually letting down her guard, her voice softened a few degrees. Miles, Eloan tricked you, she's a consummate schemer. You straight men don't see it, but I spotted her game instantly. She's just playing weak to win your sympathy. I gripped my phone, my knuckles tensing without thinking. What reason would she have to deceive me? On the other end of the line, Scarlett fell silent. At the divorce she took the house and the car, and the salary I handed over each month was squandered by her. After I started seeing Eloan and led her into my rented room, my heart was pounding. I was afraid she would, like Scarlett, look down on me for living in a rented place. I looked at Eloan guiltily and said, I'm sorry. I'll work hard to buy a bigger place. But Eloan didn't care at all. She turned and wrapped her arms around my neck, and with concern said, but Miles, I'm worried about your health. More than living in a bigger house, I want you to work less overtime. I remembered Scarlett once saying that if she had to live a life in a rented place, she'd rather be dead. So when I worked overtime until my heart fluttered and wanted to take a break, Scarlett would only say coldly, isn't a man supposed to make money? What's there to be sentimental about? But Eloan said she hoped I would take care of my body, live longer, so that we could grow old together. In that moment, my battered heart seemed to be healed a little by her. It turned out that a man without a house or car could still deserve genuine love. On the other end of the phone, Scarlett still wouldn't let up, then why are you with her? She's not as pretty as me, her family is ordinary, she simply isn't good enough for you. I sighed and said, Scarlett, being together isn't a beauty pageant. To me, looks aren't that important. Of course, Eloan wasn't ugly, she wasn't as striking as Scarlett, but the gentle, delicate type. Scarlett insisted on her odd argument, saying, I don't buy it. Men are visual creatures, otherwise, why did you love me so much back then? I lifted my spirits and asked, you called me just to badmouth Eloan. I was just worried about you. I couldn't help but laugh, Scarlett was worried about me. She complained that I couldn't afford the luxury goods she wanted, forced me to work 2 jobs, but never worried whether I'd collapse from overwork. When she made me go shopping with her after I'd worked all night, she never worried about whether my body could take it. When she and her girlfriends mocked me as her simp, as someone who made her money, she never worried whether I would feel hurt. Now that we're divorced, she actually says she's worried about me. I couldn't help saying, no need to worry about me. We each have our own lives. I wish you the life you want. Don't hang up. Scarlett seemed to realize that I really no longer belonged to her and spoke urgently, you promised my father you'd take care of me. Chapter 5. Scarlett was an adopted child, her foster mother died early, and her foster father raised her alone. I knew her childhood had been unhappy, which was one major reason I had indulged her without limits before. It wasn't, as she thought, because she was beautiful. When Scarlett and I got married, she wore a pure white wedding dress, noble, beautiful, beyond compare. I thought that would be the happiest day of my life. But when the wedding car stopped at my doorstep, she refused to get out. Add another 100,000 to the bride price, Miles. If you want to marry me, show some sincerity. I soothed her in a low voice. Scarlett, the 280,000 you asked for before has already been transferred to your account. Get out of the car first, my parents are waiting. Scarlett's makeup was immaculate, but her expression was indifferent. Coldly she said, if I have children in the future, my career and health will be affected. I'm giving more, what's wrong with asking for a little extra bride price now? My mother bowed her head with me in disgust with Scarlett. Scarlett, after the wedding is over, we'll give you all the cash gifts. But Scarlett said, cash gifts are one thing, betrothal gifts are another. The betrothal gift is the bride's personal property, are you trying to fool me? The relatives around couldn't help but point and whisper, their voices reached my ears, this is the first time I've seen a betrothal gift added at the last minute. This isn't a wedding, it's clearly a transaction. Could Miles have run into a marriage scam? They say they'd been together since college, she had Miles wrapped around her finger, her demands were high. No one understood her, many even looked down on that behavior. Only I knew she'd been raised in foster care, never felt the warmth of a family, never had a sense of security. I gritted my teeth and borrowed money from a few groomsmen, scraping together 100,000 for Scarlett so the wedding could go ahead smoothly. That day I drank a lot. Her elderly foster father took my hand and urged me to take good care of her. I agreed, of course, and in the years that followed I sent him a substantial amount every year for his living expenses. But Scarlett treated my parents as if they were invisible, icy to the extreme. She even, when my mother was ill, stood at the bedside with a face full of disdain. Miles, this is your mom, why should I take care of her? I didn't force her to look after my mother, I hired daytime caregivers and took the night shifts after work. Even so, Scarlett would still come up with fresh jabs to mock me. Terms like, outsourced filial piety, mama's boy, average Joe. At this moment I sneered, I used to be good to you, but you didn't cherish it. Scarlett, I can't help you, and I won't help you. After hanging up, I returned home. Eloan was cooking, a bowl of snowy white fish soup had already been set on the table. Try it first, see if it suits your taste. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, resting my head on her shoulder, and asked softly, I might have to go to the police station again tomorrow. What do you think? Eloan's back stiffened. She turned off the flickering stove and looked back at me. She thought I was going to persuade her to let Scarlett go, a flash of disappointment crossed her eyes, but she hid it well. Miles, if I said I want Scarlett to get the punishment she deserves, 10 days in custody, what would you think? I chuckled softly and pinched her nose. I'd think you didn't make yourself miserable for me. I'd be glad. Chapter 6. The next day I went with Eloan to the police station and saw Scarlett again. She seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. Scarlett's makeup was ruined, her eyeliner smudged until the rims of her eyes were dark, her face haggard, but her gaze full of venom. Seeing us, she glared viciously at Eloan. Eloan, you won, are you proud of yourself? Stealing a man I didn't want, does that give you such a sense of achievement? Eloan didn't respond, and simply explained her demands to the police, I won't accept any mediation. I only want Scarlett to pay for what she did. When Scarlett heard this, she suddenly laughed. Her laughter sounded particularly out of place in the solemn police station. Scarlett looked into my eyes, as if trying to reclaim a once-favored place, and said softly, Miles used to dote on me the most. To buy me a limited edition crocodile bag, he worked 2 jobs day and night. When I wanted steamed crab, no matter how tired from overtime, he'd buy the ingredients and cook, then personally pick the crab meat apart for me. A strange feeling surged up inside me, so Scarlett had always known of my efforts. Only, unlike Eloan, she thought all my sacrifices were simply to be expected. Scarlett smiled at Eloan and said, you keep swallowing your grievances and playing the virtuous innocent, do you even know what it feels like to be truly cherished? I held Eloan's hand and felt nothing but the chill of her palm. I was about to explain, but Eloan spoke first, frowning as she looked at Scarlett seriously. if Miles treats you so well, why do you keep pushing for a divorce? Do you really love him? If you love him, how could you bear to let him run himself ragged for you? At least, I couldn't. I only want him to be happy, and I believe Miles won't let me down. I had expected Scarlett's outburst to make Eloane sulk at me, so I was surprised by her reaction. Feeling inexplicably grateful, I clasped Eloane's fingers tightly with mine. Scarlett used to say that feeling sorry for a man is the start of bad luck. But in this world, which man would willingly be a tool unloved? Scarlett scoffed, seeing there was no room to maneuver, and dropped the act completely. Love, my foot. Miles is just a simpering idiot I don't even rate, take him if you want. I'd like to see what kind of life you can make without a house or a car. I had hoped that this time Scarlett would abandon her vain habits. Unexpectedly, she remained selfish and narrow-minded. I shook my head and heard Eloane say lightly with a smile, I'd like to know too, after being detained for 10 days, can you learn a thing or two? Chapter 6. That matter came to a close. To buy a house as soon as possible, I threw myself back into working day and night. Eloane didn't bother me, sometimes she was even busier than I was. She worked as a counselor at the university, conscientious and responsible, always keeping an eye on her students' studies and their mental and physical health. A few days later, it was Eloane's birthday. That day the company's chairman suddenly paid a visit, demanding data and reports, and everyone in the department was thrown into chaos. It wasn't until late at night that I realized I had missed Eloane's birthday dinner. By the time I rushed to the restaurant, the banquet was over. Amid the wreckage of the table, Eloane sat quietly on a chair waiting for me. I'm sorry, there was an emergency at the company today, I didn't mean to be late. I crouched down beside Eloane, almost about to drop to my knees and beg for forgiveness. She snorted a laugh and said, "Why are you so nervous? If you're late, you're late. I saved you some cake." I was stunned for a moment. Yes, why was I so tense? Because I habitually assumed that if I missed my girlfriend's birthday party, she'd be angry, would scold me, would shut me out all night. Eloane had been drinking, her cheeks were flushed. She brought the birthday cake up to me and, like offering a treasure, said, "I saved you the biggest, best piece, and also." My heart leapt. Suddenly I couldn't control myself, I pulled her into my arms and kissed her lips. Her face flushed to her ears as she buried herself in my embrace. I took out the gift I had long since prepared, a ring I had made by hand. Actually, beneath that simple silver band, hidden in a compartment, was a 2-carat diamond ring. I had bought it with this quarter's bonus. I remember I used to play the same trick with Scarlett. Put a cheap gift on the surface and hide an expensive luxury bracelet in the compartment. But when Scarlett saw the present her face went dark. Before I could reveal the secret, she threw the gift box into the trash can. Only after I explained did she reluctantly apologize to me. "I thought you were just being perfunctory and that's why I was angry." "Honey, you're the best." When Eloane saw the plain silver ring, she didn't get angry, instead her eyes reddened. "Miles, you're so busy, and you made the ring for me yourself. I'm really touched." At that moment the private room door suddenly opened, and Scarlett, whom we hadn't seen for a long time, walked in. Behind her trailed a thin man wearing knockoff luxury clothes, his eyes showing ill intent. "It really is you," she said to herself as she came over to my side and looked at the gifts on the table, smiling. "So this is all Eloane gets for her birthday, just this cheap little thing. I told you, if you're willing to endure hardship, you'll just have endless suffering. But I'm different, I'm so pretty, there are always men doting on me." Eloane stood up indignantly, her gaze falling on the car keys in Scarlett's hand, then flicking to the men behind her. Eloane suddenly asked, "If you're doing so well, why are you driving the car Miles bought? Is your boyfriend too poor to buy one?" Scarlett's face darkened at once, and Eloane went on, "Your boyfriend wears nothing but designer labels, he must be worth a fortune. Miles left all his assets to you because he feared you couldn't support yourself. That divorce settlement was so unfair to him. If you're living so well, why not give back what belongs to Miles?" Scarlett widened her eyes and shouted, "This is mine by right, the divorce papers were signed in black and white. Why should I give it back to you?" Eloan pressed her hand to her forehead and uttered an "oh," then said, "Well, in that case, it seems you haven't been doing so well either." The atmosphere was tense, and Scarlett was so furious she was breathing heavily. Her new boyfriend, ever the attentive one, postured charmingly and pulled her into his arms. I gave Eloan a silent thumbs up in my mind. I hadn't expected her to be so seemingly delicate yet never to back down. I leaned over and whispered to her, "Babe, look." The ring box spun once in my hand. I gently opened the compartment, and a clear diamond ring glittered under the light. Eloan looked at the ring, then pointed at herself, surprised for a long moment before reacting. "Miles, is this for me?" I nodded and said softly, "I want to give you the best." Beside us, jealousy flared in Scarlett's eyes. She gritted her teeth and slunk away. Eloan threw herself into my arms, and after a long while she lifted her small face to look at me. "Miles, why don't we sell the ring?" I was slightly surprised and hurriedly asked, "Why?" She fidgeted and said, "For the engagement ring, I can get a moissanite, only a few $100. It looks just as pretty. I don't want you to spend too much, save the money so we can buy a house and a car later." I smiled and patted her head. They say only foolish men like flirty girls. But until you've experienced it, you don't know how a girl who's so innocent, straightforward, and unpretentious could ever be called a flirt. Buying a house and a car is my business, so don't worry about that. Just behave and be my little princess. Chapter 7. After Scarlett got a boyfriend, she often showed off their love on social media. Sometimes she'd post, "Only after leaving the wrong person do you realize how beautiful a new life can be." The accompanying picture was of her boyfriend personally dyeing her hair. She used to frequent salons and had high standards for hair care, often spending tens of thousands on hairstyles. Unexpectedly, she was now willing to dye her hair at home and didn't mind her boyfriend's poor technique, even though he dyed her hair a dull yellow. This time, she wrote, "You used to say I was vain, but meeting him taught me that a life of simple things is true happiness." The accompanying picture showed her boyfriend sitting on the floor, turning an old shirt into a canvas bag for her. I frowned, and Eloan leaned over and asked, "You're not jealous, are you?" I looked at her and smiled, saying, "What are you talking about? I just feel that something's off." Eloan sighed and said, "It's inevitable to be upset seeing an ex showing off their love. If it gets really bad, I can help you roast them." I couldn't help but exclaim, "How can you be so magnanimous?" She stuck out her tongue, looking adorable. "Isn't it because I can't bear to see you sad?" Before I could argue, she immediately commented under the photo, "That shirt must be Miles's, right? I mean, your boyfriend is truly stingy, living in Miles's house, driving Miles's car, and even to give you a bag he has to remake one from Miles's old shirt. Is he just milking Miles like one fat sheep?" A few minutes later, Scarlett deleted that moment's post. I imagine she's stomping mad over there. I've always admired Eloan's fighting spirit. I pulled Eloan into my arms and explained, "It's not that I'm upset by her showing off her relationship, I just feel that men is off." Eloan thought for a moment and said, "I think he's off too. That's not a rich second-generation heir, that's clearly a freeloader." I hesitated about whether to warn Scarlett. Eloan patted my arm and said, "If you want to warn her, go ahead. Don't worry about me. Besides, I trust you wouldn't have any other designs on her." I thought for a moment, handed her my phone, and said, "I don't know how to persuade her either. Why don't you send her a message from my account?" Eloan readily took it and sent Scarlett a line, "Open your eyes and see the people around you clearly." Unexpectedly Scarlett replied quickly, "Miles, seeing me show off my love made you jealous, didn't it? I always knew you'd regret it sooner or later. If you come back now and beg me, I might consider it. But first, you have to make that bitch Eloan apologize to me." I stared at the string of messages and everything went black before my eyes. Eloan patted my shoulder and clicked her tongue, saying, "Miles, respect other people's fates and let go of the need to play savior." Chapter 8. After 6 months of hard work, I finally got promoted and a raise. After saving up the down payment, the first thing I did was take Eloan to look at houses. We hadn't been satisfied with the few places we'd seen when the agent suddenly said there was a property that fit our needs. The owner was desperate to sell, and the price was low. So we agreed to go see it with the agent, who chattered the whole way. He said the owner had been swindled out of all her savings by her boyfriend and had racked up a lot of online loans. Collectors were coming to the door every day demanding repayment. The owner couldn't bear it and decided to sell the house. As he spoke, the agent's car slowly drove into a familiar complex. It was the neighborhood where Scarlett and I had lived as newlyweds. I still couldn't believe it even when the agent led us to the door. The person who had been tricked by her boyfriend into selling her apartment was Scarlett. The doorframe had been splashed with paint, and scrawled across it in large characters were the words, "Pay your debts." The door stood open and the apartment was in shambles. Scarlett wore a shabby set of sleepwear, her long hair hanging loose, her face haggard. When she saw us, a flicker of surprise crossed her eyes, then she dove into my arms. "Miles, I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you like this. Will you forgive me? I promise I'll be good to you from now on. I'll change, please come back to me." I looked at Eloan awkwardly, while the agent beside us stared in astonishment, as if he hadn't expected such a melodrama to unfold before his eyes. I pushed Scarlett aside, took Eloan's hand, and said, "Scarlett, Eloan and I are getting married. We were just looking at the house today. Being here was purely a coincidence." Scarlett stared at me in a daze, her face as pale as paper, and suddenly fainted to the floor. Eloan was the first to react, calling 911 while performing first aid on her. After quite a bit of commotion, Scarlett finally came to in the hospital. The doctor said she had been worrying too much and not eating properly. Low blood sugar caused the fainting. Eloan had put aside her old hostility and even bought nutritious soup to bring to the hospital. Scarlett snorted disdainfully. "So this is how you seduce Miles?" I hurriedly interrupted her. "Don't say that." Eloan was unperturbed. "I talked it over with Miles. We can fund you to hire a lawyer and make that scumbag cough up the money he cheated you out of. But..." She paused, then said, "This is as far as we can go. Anything more, like coveting Miles, forget it. He's my husband." Scarlett gave a weak smile, looked out the window, and tears slid silently down her face. Later, when Eloan and I got married, we received a congratulatory gift that Scarlett had entrusted to someone to deliver. It was a car key and $100,000 in cash. The car was the same one I had once left for her. The cash was the money I had originally given her to hire a lawyer. I heard that although Scarlett won that lawsuit, the money had already been squandered by her swindler of a boyfriend. She sold the house, returned to her adoptive father's side, found a new job, and step by step, kept striving to live. Eloan smiled and asked me, "Now that Scarlett has been transformed, do you regret it? If she had changed earlier, maybe you wouldn't have divorced." I shook my head and said, "Maybe she was a lesson in my life. Because of her, I now cherish what I have more." There were countless nights I suffered alone, wondering why I worked so hard while she never learned to appreciate it. It was only later that I understood, accompanying someone as they grow is, in itself, a painful thing. And precisely because of that, I came to see how precious Eloan was, the way she had silently loved me all along and tolerated my faults. I took Eloan's hand, and together we walked into the hall of marriage.